we might say that epistemology matters because things can hurt us and things can help us. So the transcendence of things, what is most important, what is central in their transcendence is their ability to harm, hinder, or help us. Now, I think this point, it works against indirect realism, because indirect realism would make that harming or helping epiphenomenal or secondary, right? It would sort of try to swallow what is vital in the object, and what it would leave behind, the residue that it would call real, would not include why the object matters, the essence of its transcendence, which would be its value or disvalue. So just recall that transcendence in the context of phenomenology means the not insideness, the beyond meanness of the object. So, this is not a mystical term. The object is transcendent just means it's out there in the world between us. That's why I've tried to use the phrase between usness. The object is between us, and then it's outside of us, outside of each of us, considered as subjects. And I prefer not to think of subjects as containers, even though this is a dominant metaphor that we get from indirect realism. So I would say that phenomenalism is very connected to existentialism. If existentialism is understood as a kind of critique of theodicy, of theological metaphysics, of central authority, existentialism, one way to think of it, at least to me, is it insists upon, it emphasizes our situatedness, that we are individuals who have to make difficult decisions, mortal individuals who are thrust into a world that is ambiguous, dangerous, tantalizing, but also perhaps empty. It can come to seem empty or lacking essence to the degree that we find nothing in it that endures. And even the sense that substance is that which endures, we can really investigate that. Is that an inheritance, or is that something kind of written into the nature of the human? So the object as something like the synthesis of its aspects, this idea, you can find it in Husserl. Some version of this is in Kant, at least according to Adorno. I was reading his book on the CPR. It has a mathematical beauty, but even if one sort of blurs it a little bit, or the perfect mathematical version is a kind of oversimplification. It's a way to try to point at something that's definitely messier and blurrier in experience. But it's the way that we are fused together, that our lives are entangled, right? It's our lives are entangled in this sensory perception-ary, emotional way, in that we are, our existence, each of our existences is a streaming of one and the same world, but each of us from a different embodied and vulnerable on the way perspective. So you can think about the way people compete for objects, even simple objects like access to water, or who gets the shiniest toy, or who gets the most prominent spot, who wins the attention or the honor, which is a more symbolic kind of entity. But you can see that life, we are entangled in the same entities. Our having these different kinds of objects together is at the very center of our lives. And this is why you might want to understand the object as a system of its faces. And then the face of an object would be the object for me at a particular moment. And for me to have that object as an object, I would have to understand that object is also meaning something to others and meaning something to me in the future, and as having meant something to me in the past. So I also talked about how time can only show by hiding, that for one aspect or face of an object to be manifest means that all of its other faces are not manifest. And you could say that in a way that an object is an infinite, blurry equivalence classes of its faces, aspects, or moments. A related thought, I was thinking about a particular movie, it doesn't matter which. I was thinking about how a movie is a linear revelation of narrative depth. So the same story, it can be told in many different ways. There's a sequence of revelations. Maybe you start in the middle of the story, and then you will jump back to the past. So the audience has seen the middle first and now experiences the past as informing what they've already seen, which chronologically comes later. So the artist is controlling and deciding this linear revelation of narrative depth. Now, we might also talk about the impiety of empiricism. So Deleuze, he seems to read empiricism as a kind of anti-philosophy, or that, the spirit of empiricism is suspicious of systems, right? Of any kind of closed, dogmatic structure. And I like his approach. I like his reading of Nietzsche. So I've called my own approach to phenomenalism ontocubism, because ontological cubism, what I liked about that is it grants, you might say, it acknowledges darkness, it acknowledges ignorance. Now, I find it hard not to believe that I share objects with other people, but I don't want to assume that I know how those objects manifest. Now, that doesn't mean I have no preconceptions or expectations. The point is to have a theory that is relatively minimal. What is the minimal structure of rationality, or what do I think, what can I safely perhaps posit? What is a system that says enough but not too much? On the other hand, there is something empiricist or existential about phenomenalism, which means some people will not like it because, metaphysical realism, or, any kind of theodicy system, any kind of theism, that's going to build far more structure into the picture. Some kind of central authority will be brought into the picture, right? So I've jokingly called it theomaterialism, because you either have theism or metaphysical realism. In either case, you have a truth maker. Now, people may be epistemically humble, like, well, we don't know the will of God, we don't know how God sees things, but how God sees things is how they really are. And on the flip side, the secular version of this is that there is a true reality, but we can never know if we have described it, if our statements correspond with it. But at least our statements are true and false, even if we can never decide which. So, pragmatism has left its stain on me. And, these are relatively technical issues. So you would want to zoom out and look at the general personality of the philosopher. And I think that this is what people do, that they sort of take sides with one another in terms of what you might call cultural, spiritual values. So I'd just like to end this recording with a defense of a certain kind of relativism or skepticism. And basically, it's easy to misunderstand skepticism as the earnest claim that there is no truth. But I think there's a more sophisticated version where there's this attitude of suspicion and irony toward any dogmatism, and even an attitude of suspicion and irony toward irony that becomes too earnest or insufficiently suspicious about this very suspicion.